kuuman taikinan, suolaksi hän aikoi pienen Suomen maan. Ai, Kerensky, turha on sun toiveesi, Suomi on jo vapaa maa, ryssän vallasta. Puolan maa on jauhot, Viro hiivana, Ukraina on sokeri, Liivi liemenä. Auno Sepsä Inkeri, Doni Krimi Kaukaasi, kaartemummit, safraimet, voit ja maustineet.
There's a reason I started this video with a Finnish propaganda song that became quite popular during the Winter War. The lyrics detail the story of Kerensky, a Russian politician during the last days of the Russian Empire, and his futile attempts to preserve this Russian Empire. The song resonated quite strongly in 1939, and unfortunately, today in 2022, it still resonates. Russia has invaded Ukraine in a full-scale war. And this puts Finland in an uncomfortable position and facing a dangerous reality. Finns empathize with Ukraine because there are a lot of similarities in regards to dealing with our mutual eastern neighbor, whether it's Kerensky, Stalin, or Putin. In the past month, even prior to the invasion of Ukraine, Finland joining NATO has been a very hot topic in the Finnish and international news. Maybe you've seen it yourself. And now that full-scale war has broken out in Ukraine, the rhetoric around NATO has rapidly shifted in Finland. What used to be a matter of not wanting to provoke an already aggressive neighbor has now been embraced by a large percentage of Finns. But if you're not one of the 80% of my viewers from Finland, you might be wondering, wait a second, I thought Finland was already in NATO. But this is not the case. To understand why Finland joining NATO is such a complex and hot topic right now, we need to go back and look at the history between Finland and Russia. To say Finland and Russia have a complicated relationship is an understatement. Here's the Cliff Notes version of it. It goes back to when Finland was part of the Russian Empire, and there's a lot I could cover about Finland during its time as an imperial subject of Russia, but I'm not going to. That's a potential future video. When a revolution broke out in Russia in 1917, Finland became independent. After a civil war between communist and capitalist monarchist factions in Finland, the new country shared a border with an unfriendly neighbor to the east. So unfriendly that when Finland refused to give in to Soviet territory demands, the Soviets shelled a town on their side of the border, blaming it on the Finns. Doesn't that sound oddly familiar? I can guarantee that if this video gets big enough, there will be Russian trolls in the comments denying this false flag attack, as Russian trolls have denied the current false flag attacks that are going on in Ukraine. After the Soviet false flag attacks, the Winter War ensued, in which Finland weathered the storm against a much, much larger Soviet Union. Finland lost the war and had to cede land in the east, but the miracle of Finland surviving as an independent state is one of the core foundations of the Finnish national identity. After the Winter War, Finland wanted to regain its lost land in the east and launched the Continuation War. But this time, they weren't alone. Now, the Finns don't use the term ally when describing their relationship with Nazi Germany. Rather, they prefer to use the term co-belligerent. But I'll let you be the judge of that. While the Finns initially took back lost land and then some, the Soviets eventually repelled them, but sought a peace treaty to focus Soviet troops on the Germans in the south. The Finns were also forced to fight the remaining German troops in Finland as they retreated into Norway. This war became known as the Lapland War. On paper, the terms of the armistice agreement between the Soviet Union and Finland did not look even remotely favorable to the Finns. Along with land lost in the east and on the Arctic Ocean, the Finns had to sacrifice land for a Soviet military base, repel the remaining Germans in the north, and pay immense reparations to the Soviet Union, all while being excluded from the Marshall Plan, the US's stimulus package for post-war Europe. The war and its aftermath devastated Finland, and one of the reasons my grandmother immigrated to the US in the early 1950s was because post-war Finland was not the place you wanted to be in those days. After World War II, the Finns started to make appeasements to their neighbors in the east. The Soviets wanted reparation payments in the form of heavy industry. So Finns built and exported everything from trains to hydroelectric power to icebreakers, all gifting them to the Soviet Union as part of their reparations payments. While Finland had to pay its war debt, this also forced the country to rapidly industrialize in order to meet its quotas. In some ways, these reparations can be viewed as an overall positive for the Finnish economy because they helped the country develop so quickly. Cold War Europe divided the continent into two primary factions, the Warsaw Pact in the east and NATO in the west. Left in between them or on the outskirts were a few neutral countries from all over the political spectrum. The obvious neutral countries like Switzerland and Sweden didn't join NATO, and even Yugoslavia remained nominally neutral by abstaining from the Warsaw Pact. For some of these countries, neutrality was an option. However, for Finland, neutrality was the only choice given the hand the Finns were dealt. Finland's unique position of reluctant neutrality coined a term that is used in international relations, even today, Finlandization. Put simply, Finlandization is when a small state makes appeasements to a larger, more powerful neighbor, while still maintaining sovereignty. Some people point to other relationships in global politics, like Switzerland during the time of Nazi Germany, or modern Taiwan and China, as other examples of Finlandization. And during the Cold War, Finland walked a tightrope in regards to its relations with the Soviets, one of their biggest trading partners at this time, but also one whose intentions were never fully trusted by the Finnish people. While Finland was independent, there was still a policy of self-censorship in the media, and some films that were deemed too anti-Soviet were banned or altered, like The Manchurian Candidate, One Day in the Life of Denisovich, and this 1986 gem called Born American, starring Chuck Norris's son, Mike Norris.
Ladies, your prayers have been answered.
Because they couldn't get Chuck Norris due to budget constraints. No, I'm not making any of this up. This is a legitimate movie that was like greenlit and produced. And yes, I watched the entirety of this movie, so you don't have to. So if you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, and you haven't liked and haven't shared this video with your friends, I beg of you, because I'm going to give you this dissection of Born American, which was at one point considered too anti-Soviet for the Finnish population. Well, okay, they had to censor like a minor portion, but anyway, here's the rundown on the actual movie itself. Born American, also known as Arctic Heat in its UK release, details 3 college kids, and it's classic 80s cliches. Books are stupid, nerds suck, crossing international borders to go across the Soviet Union and burn down a small little Russian village, that's cool. You got to do more of that. That's pretty cool, pretty chill. And then the movie just starts taking some weird turns. And while I understand what they're going for in theory, the execution just doesn't do it for me. But they get to a Soviet prison factory where there's like this game of life or death chess, and the rules are not spelled out. The rules are very unclear, and if you've seen this movie, you're probably thinking the same thing. Because the idea is that the king is the one who's in charge of the game, but if you lose in the chess game, you die. So theoretically, and the game doesn't seem to end. It seems to be one ongoing game of chess that just never ends. There's never shown, all right, well, that team died, now we have a new chess team in. And it seems like it would be like a team kind of thing. And if you're a pawn in this game, then you're just gonna die anyway. I digress. The whole movie was very lackluster and left me with more questions than answers. And at the end of the day, I think the real benefactor from this movie being altered or banned was probably film aficionados, not even the Soviets. I mean, listen, like 2 thumbs down, I gotta say. The coolest part is that the movie was like made in Finland. Other than that, I can't say too many positive things, especially with this lackluster training sequence. I'm not even slightly fired up. And this is the 80s. We're talking like the peak of like anti-Soviet film. We're talking Rocky IV. And this is the training sequence they come up with? Come on. It's honestly a little shameful. Now that we're off that tangent on Born American, so Finland's policy had been neutrality, and like other European countries employing a national policy of neutrality, Finland has conscription, aka the reason I came to Finland. Even though my accent in Finnish is rougher than scabbed shark skin, I am somehow a Finnish citizen. And I'm also a man. Women aren't required to do military service in Finland. They can do voluntary service if they so wish. However, unlike Austria and Switzerland, both of which are also not NATO members, Finland shares a border with a rather aggressive neighbor. Conscription is used as a deterrent to ensure defense. Most Finns know and understand that war with Russia would not end in Finland's favor, but the whole point is to make it too costly for the Russians to even attempt conflict. Hence, the whole conscription situation. It's also been the means to ensure neutrality in Finland. Technically, the Finnish constitution doesn't allow troops outside of its borders unless it's a UN-sanctioned peacekeeping mission. Even to evacuate Finnish personnel from Afghanistan in 2021, special provisions were required for that military mission. So joining an international alliance, albeit one with a defensive mindset, could be antithetical for modern Finland. The issue for Finns is they don't want to get embroiled into a foreign war. However, it's important to remember that Finland isn't exactly neutral by choice. It's been forced to for political and economic reasons. At this point, Finland is as close to being in NATO without formally falling under the umbrella of Article 5. A former NATO official even said that if Finland put in the paperwork on a Wednesday, it would be a NATO member by the Friday of the same week. Finland supported NATO forces in Afghanistan and maintains close cooperation with the organization. It's one of the reasons Finland's Air Force flies F-18 Hornets at the moment. Finland also just announced the most expensive arms package in the country's history by purchasing F-35s a few months ago. A great analogy for understanding Finland's complex relationship with Russia and NATO is by looking at its primary combat arm, the RK-62, specifically the Mark II variant. Now, if you're unfamiliar with firearms, this is a unique weapon for a few reasons. Few Russian exports are as prolific as the AK-47, of which the Finnish RK is a direct riff-off, albeit a much better version. For my American viewers, think of the RK like the Trader Joe's JoJo to the AK's Oreo. Not the original, but leagues ahead in quality. The older variants of the RK were designed to be compatible entirely with the AK platform. The same caliber of bullets and the same magazines work in both. However, with the RK Mark II, something new was introduced that showed Finland was being pulled deeper into the orbit of NATO. While the central part of the gun is all AK, the rails, the stock, and many of the other accessories are all NATO compliant and compatible. In fact, this rail system was previously known as the NATO rail before being changed to the Picatinny rail. So even in the weapons of Finland, we can see this division between East and West, and Finland kind of divided between Russia and NATO. So what do I personally think about it? Am I just a poorly disguised CIA plant convincing Finns that NATO membership is the only option? Or am I an extremely cleverly disguised FSB agent convincing Finns that NATO is the wrong decision for Finland? I used to believe that the time for NATO membership had passed Finland, that the best option was to join in the wake of the Soviet Union's collapse, when Finland joined the European Union. On the other hand, it seems the best means for Finland's defense is not only that it is a member of the European Union, but the fact that it is a member of the Eurozone. Sure, we can debate the economic merits of the Euro project for hours. I myself am skeptical over its success. However, the Euro is more of a political statement than an economic experiment, which may be a future video of mine if I decide to shy away from primarily Finnish content. While the Eurozone is not a defense treaty by any means, and neither is the EU for that matter, although there are elements of collective defense in there, I find it hard to believe that other Eurozone members would stand idly by in the face of conflict. It would simply be too costly and too economically destructive. And if I'm being honest, I'm a bit skeptical of the United States in holding up its end of the bargain. Now yes, I understand the irony in that statement given the military GDP spending of most NATO members is extremely low in comparison to the US. With that being said, after the Trump administration and the rhetoric over protecting the Baltic states, I'm not sure if the United States will support Article 5 when push comes to shove. While the US has an obligation, and Article 5 was enacted when the US was attacked on September 11th, 2001, I don't see war over the Baltic states as popular in the US. Foreign wars are becoming less and less popular in the United States, which is looking like a less reliable partner than it did a few decades ago. If a potential Baltic invasion is already being questioned by the US public, is it really worth it for the Finns to join NATO? In fact, I think the argument could be made that NATO benefits more from Finland joining than Finland itself in some ways. While older figures put Finland right around the median on military spending by GDP, it doesn't take into account the recent F-35 deal, worth nearly $10 billion, which is alone over 3% of Finland's yearly GDP. Additionally, Finland's military punches well above its weight class in terms of numbers. Finland boasts more artillery pieces than France and Germany combined, nearly 900,000 reserve soldiers, and a national will to fight that is more culturally ingrained than the rest of Europe. While Western Europe has significantly scaled back their military spending and the size of their armies, Finland's has mostly stayed consistent. But this could also be subject to change, and perhaps NATO accession would see a scaling back of conscription in Finland towards a more professional military. And then the question becomes, does Russia even have interest in modern-day Finland? And to that, I say, look at the news. However, there is no significant Russian-speaking minority in Finland like there is in Ukraine or the Baltic states. Finland was never a member of the Soviet Union nor the Warsaw Pact, and Finland has its deterrent strategy of nearly 900,000 reserve soldiers. Sure, there is the occasional incursion into Finnish airspace by Russian planes, or the odd oligarch island with 9 piers and a helipad along Finland's most vital shipping route. But these appear to be nothing more than a show of force. Finland is also threatened by Russia every time it flirts with the idea of joining NATO, and Russia likes nothing more than to flex its weight in regards to Finland and NATO accession. But even looking at this from a strategic perspective, with war raging in Ukraine, does it make sense for Russia to open up a new front 1,000 kilometers wide? But at the same time, it's very tough to predict irrational moves, and conflict can spiral out of control.
Whenever Finland and NATO is brought up, Sweden is also brought up as well. However, it should be noted that Sweden's position as a neutral country is one that has been more of a choice than Finland's. Finland's is one that has been dictated by its geopolitics. Whether Finland and Sweden join together is up to debate. Maybe that's a video that my evil Swedish-American twin needs to make on YouTube. I don't know if I'm really the right person to make that video. I will say it may be in Sweden's interest given Russia's increased interest in Gotland, a very strategic island right in the center of the Baltic Sea. I'm going to end this by saying that my opinion on NATO accession for Finland doesn't really matter. I'm one person, I'm not a government elected official. All I have to justify whatever I said today was because I have an international relations degree. And even that is kind of a flimsy argument to make. What I will say though, is I did at first think that a referendum would be the right choice. Countless other countries have joined international organizations based on referendum. And it's how Finland first joined the European Union in 1995. It was because of a 1994 referendum. However, given the current state of referendums and the openness it would put to Finland being attacked from Russian misinformation, I'm skeptical on a referendum in this case as well. I'm also skeptical that politicians won't take this as seriously as they should and try not to antagonize Russia, even though in this case, we've seen the very real consequences of not being a NATO member. Granted, Finland is still in the European Union, but still, having the security of collective defense might not be the worst thing during a time like this. It seems that the Finnish people are also kind of changing their attitudes about NATO as well. A citizens' initiative already received 50,000 signatures within a week about Parliament discussing the idea to join NATO. Previous citizens' initiatives have only received about 2,000 or so signatures. So already reaching the 50,000 required for it to get to Parliament truly shows a step in a new direction for Finland in regards to the politics around NATO accession. At the end of the day though, this is a choice that Finland should make, whether to remain neutral or to join NATO, and not one that Finland should be pushed into because of geopolitics or economics. This is a choice that Finland has to decide for itself once and for all. I want to say thank you for watching this video, and if you liked it, like, share, subscribe, share it with your friends, all that jazz. At the moment, my channel is not currently monetized. However, if this video picks up and it does make my channel monetized, kind of unlikely given the serious matter of this topic, I will be donating every single dollar, cent, euro, whatever is made from this video to Ukrainian charities. I'm going to also leave some links to reputable Ukrainian charities in the list below. Ukraine's fight truly is Europe's fight, and my heart is with the entire country of Ukraine. Slava Ukraina.